Hello, and welcome back to the Plot Mom channel. I know I've been away for a while, but I've been busy typing, mostly with one of the gentlemen down here, other corner, that one. Today is the first of a series of roundtable discussions on Fridays, where we will be bringing in all sorts of authors to talk about a whole bunch of literary subjects, and I'm sure we will find some incredibly educational things and some very funny things and meet some new friends. So before we get into the topic today, which is how to push characters to the brink, let me have our guest authors introduce themselves.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Jessica. As you can see, go under my pen name J. Dorden. I write sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, and I absolutely love this subject because I constantly try and break my characters. Usually it ends well, sometimes it doesn't, and I've only been writing for a few years, but hopefully with Allegra and Chris's help, we can write a lot more.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christopher Russell. I'm the author of the Divinity's Twilight fantasy series that you can see behind me. Turn my finger, get the camera right. There we go. Divinity's Twilight Rebirth, the first novel in that series. It is a broad scope of an epic that combines magic and technology, lots of characters, varied world building, lots of fun stuff to get into. But that's perfect for what we're doing here because we're going to talk about how all those elements in the world put pressure on your characters and really strain them until they either grow or maybe they fail.
Hi, my name is C.T. Phipps. I'm the author of The Rules of Supervillainy and Agent G Infiltrator, which I'm going to be talking about today. I have written a couple other series, but these are a superhero parody novel series, which I think stands pretty well up to succeeding over the DC universe, Marvel, everything else, superior in all ways. And Agent G Infiltrator is a techno thriller that turns into a cyberpunk series after the entire world goes to hell.
I need to pick this up. Cyberpunk
As it always does.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you all for being here. And what I kind of want to start this off with is a question of kind of the importance of this subject. And it's, why is it important to put characters in situations that challenge them?
Well, it comes back to narrative tension, that you have to have events in your story. You have to have problems, you have to have conflicts, and your characters have to work on getting to resolutions at the end of them. That it is the building blocks. You're looking for change, that your character starts in a certain place. They might have flaws, they might have limitations, they might have a certain view of the world, a certain morality. And your goal as the author is to take them to an end state that is somehow different, that they have either grown, they've regressed, and the climax at the middle of that, where you put them under some sort of strain, whether it be a war, torture, mental anguish, loss, trauma. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but that is the darkest night, as we authors say, that the point at which they either take all the lessons that you've given them through the action, through other characters, through experience, and they either accept them or they reject them. And the story can go in different ways from that point. But that is your narrative push, that unless your characters change, you're not going to get anywhere. The reader isn't going to latch on to anything.
I definitely have a view that we, as the reader, always want to see our heroes tortured horribly. Mm-hmm. Especially if we love them. Because there's no end of psychologically breaking, traumatizing, and horrible things that authors love to do to their babies. And the more we love them, the more that their lives will be complete misery. Because that's where the drama comes from, and we're all sadists at heart.
Isn't that true?
It always, for me, it comes back to, as a reader and a writer, that we want readers to be able to immerse themselves into the stories, and you have to make a character human, or at least some type of connection with the reader. So if a character is going through a bunch of trauma, that the reader can like live out through them. It can be cathartic by the end. Like there's some stories that will tear me up and make me cry like forever, but it also releases the heavy emotions I'm feeling at the time. Or it'll make me laugh. And you know how they say laughter is the best medicine. It's you have to connect, and that's where I find my biggest issue is they're not human enough for me to connect to, so I don't feel like finishing the book. So I try to make sure all my characters have that human feeling to them, even if they're aliens.
And something very human is to go through hell, because
Yes.
we all do in our own ways, right?
Yes.
So what's your philosophy about writing that pivotal shift in the story that happens around the darkest night? Like almost every story has one, whether it's really very literal, it's night and everything is horrible and nothing, the dawn will never come. And some it's just very much the lowest point of the novel. How do you go about structuring that? CT, do you want to start?
Oh, I was just about to interrupt everyone else there and steal my place in line. Well, for me, I actually think the best way to do The Darkest Night, and it certainly is one that I always do in my books, is to always dangle a little mouse in front of the cat that is the reader and take it away at the last second, just when the hero thinks they're actually winning. I'm the kind of guy that, after Frodo has thrown... had his finger bitten off by Gollum, and everything is going to happen. Then suddenly the ring bounces out. No. I'm terrible at that kind of thing. My heroes often go on epic journeys of self-discovery and trying to find something about themselves and achieve something great in their lives. And then I like to give it to them in the most horrible, terrible way possible. My main character in the Rules of Supervillainy is Gary Karkovsky, who has always wanted to be a supervillain the same way that Ray Liotta always wanted to be a gangster. He admired the whole mystique of being a bad guy, and, well, he finally gets the chance to become one when he gets a magic cloak and finds out, oh my goodness, these people are just bad. Nothing cool about it. They're a bunch of psychopaths. Wow. Oh, and well, I've killed a few of them, and now I'm wanted for murder. Oh, that's going to be hard on the marriage. Things get worse from there. Agent G is an anti-hero from the very beginning. He is a cyborg assassin working for a cold corporate culture that would make him the bad guy in almost every other cyberpunk novel, because he is. And, he has had his memories erased because that's part of his contract. And he's thinking like, well, I can get them back after I fulfill my contract. Oh, yes, because the corporation is totally going to honor that agreement. Once they get me under the knife and I'm about to retire, that's not going to be a scene for betrayal. Well, I'll just find out who I am on my own. And, oh, wow, that was so much worse than actually not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to say what he finds out, but you'll have to find out in the last chapter, which conveniently leads to the next book that will cost more.
As it always does.
So you see that the real suffering here is the reader.
Oh, yes. Yes, you always need to leave on, not necessarily a cliffhanger, but yes, a cliffhanger. The first hit is always 99 cents.
So tangent. So going off of what CT Phipps was saying, what I like to do is you close out the hero's arc or something like that. You leave them a little bit of resolution that the reader can be happy with, and then you head to the epilogue, and something awful happens somewhere else in the world or to some other character, and that is the tie-in. So they feel fulfilled at the end of the novel, and also craving what comes next.
Yes, the great David Lynch said that his biggest problem with writing Twin Peaks was the fact everyone wanted to know who killed Laura Palmer. And once that happens, there's no show. Well, obviously, you need to go set up the next mystery for that so there can be the next season, and so on until you finally get canceled and rake in the dough. Rake in the Friends money.
My actual Darkest Night wasn't at the end. It was in the middle after torturing my poor character for a bit. At the end, you know how it usually happens. Something surprising comes along. But in the middle, I had to think. A good way to do it is thinking about the way if you want your character to break or bend. Because if you want them to fully break and then rebuild from there, that's a great story too. But I chose a different way of the pirates pushed a little bit further, and instead of breaking him, it made him get filled with resolve to, see it through and finish them off if he could. And you can either break them entirely, or you can make them more, it makes them stronger in a way instead of just breaking.
My view for The Darkest Night has always been this transition between wants and needs. If the first part of the story starts off with what the character wants, The Darkest Night is when that's torn away from them and crushed into itty bitty pieces, but that teaches them something or gives them a way to reach for what they need.
We are the same person, Allegra. You stole my answer.
Sorry.
No, you're
I'm
fine.
a villain.
Yep, you're the villain in all the stories.
Oh, yes.
But no, oh, go ahead, CT.
I was just going to say that it's funny that they mentioned the bending or breaking analogy. There's actually a line in one of my books where my anti-hero, Gary, finally summarizes why so many superheroes end up going full Sith, as he calls it. He says, supervillains are people who could have been superheroes, but the men that would not bend simply broke. And that is a good analogy, because if you are trying to be perfect and have a black and white view of the world, there's only two ways you can go. You can either go up or down.
Yes.
Gary just hovers kind of in the middle there.
Yeah.
So looking at wants versus needs, and this is getting into the bones of story structure, the next phase of that is promises and payoffs. At the beginning of your story, you have promised that a character, your hero or party, whatever the group of people you're following is, that they want a certain thing, that they're going to go out and they're going to get this grail, they're going to complete this quest, they're going to stop this war and bring peace to the kingdom, or whatever it is. And at the Darkest Night, they have reached a point where there is some reason that they're not going to get that, or that they're going to have to overcome some Herculean trial to achieve what they want. And at that point, as you were talking about the bend versus break, well, maybe what they wanted wasn't what they needed. Maybe what they wanted is actually going to make things worse. And it's a bit of breaking disillusionment that, and you can do that through trauma, through hardship, through torture, through any of the things that we described. But where you come out on the other side, you're hoping that the character has metamorphized, that their way of thinking has changed, that it's not necessarily going in the direction of what you need, but there is an upward trajectory. And so you think about it sort of like this parabola, that they're on a journey from up to down. And then down to up again, hopefully.
Hopefully. Or down to villainy.
Yes. They just keep going.
Or just down 6 feet under. But that's sci-fi horror stories. But
So how do you go about, you've had your Darkest Night, and it's usually this moment of deep, character suffering. How do you then build a climax that still feels fulfilling when you've already pushed your character so far in that Darkest Night? How do you top it?
I think that The Darkest Night is something where you can never really go fully happily ever after that. You have to accept that if there is a measure of victory for your protagonist, it's going to come at a considerable cost and be bitter more than sweet, I think, if you really do it well. To go on with Gary, who finds out that being a supervillain is not nearly the cakewalk he thought it would be, even when he achieves his vengeance and his wealth and so on, it's cost him something absolutely terrible, and he would not necessarily have gone down the path he did afterwards. In the case of Agent G, it's a story about a man who starts as a respected, wealthy kind of odd job henchman for the bad guys and the corporations and so on. And he has to give up that wealth, position, and power to get his own measure of freedom there. But it also leaves lots of mental scars as well. He finds out what he wanted wasn't what he necessarily needed. But even when he has what he needs, it's something that has its own price.
Yeah.
I think CT hits the nail on the head. It's about exacting a toll from the hero. Because realistically, we don't expect anyone to get away scot-free. That if you reach the end of the war and all your heroes come out with their limbs intact, with their psyches unscarred, with everyone still alive, that the reader doesn't find it believable, that there's been no payoff. And so the question is, what exactly can you do to your hero? What is going to be irrevocably changed about them? Is it going to be their personality? Have they lost their sense of humor? Are they no longer willing to look their fellows in the eye? Are they going to become a recluse for the rest of their lives? And you have very different ways that you can come out of this, ranging from light to dark. And it's typically about what you put in beforehand, that somewhere along the way you changed your promise about what the character needed. And so when you come out of this crucible, that is going to determine the direction that you head in. We often have the glorified hero. You have Lord of the Rings. Aragorn comes out of his crucible holding his sword high, King of Gondor. Sam and Frodo come out of it. Frodo far more scarred than Sam, I would say, because Sam is able to return to the Shire and have the family that he always wanted. And Frodo never really is the same, that he's always has a distant look in his eyes until he goes off to the Grey Havens, the ships to the west. And so you see this whole spectrum in whatever work you have. And that's the key, that if you have a group of characters, that all of them react differently, that the reader expects a spectrum of reactions because life itself is messy and is on a spectrum. So you give that to them.
Yeah, all of that's the same. I just I added that they fulfilled their mission at the end of my book, but the bad guys got away or something like that. Something that and in book 2 is when they'll find out the full toll of book 1, like what fully happens with their psyche or their physical ability or anything, and leaving a little bit in the epilogue to show that there's not everything is okay, but you'll just have to read to figure it out more. That's when I torture the reader, not the character.
That's the talking about book-contained arcs versus series-contained arcs, because you can have a book Darkest Night, and then your series Darkest Night could be in book 2 or book 3, or your character arc Darkest Night could be in book 2 and book 4 or whatever.
Interesting enough, David Weber, author of the Honor Harrington series, said, military fiction where no one dies on the side of good is not military science fiction, it's military pornography.
Yes,
I love
that is
that.
very accurate.
Oh, yes. And I'm going to be perfectly met. I do try and create characters that are deep, interesting, likable, and I make them solely for the purposes of killing them halfway through the book, just as a way of hurting the reader. And sometimes, I swear, I've actually had happy endings in my book, or endings where things are mostly good. Just then, I have to say, something horrible happens at the end of the chapter. I am adding that on just to spoil things.
Yeah, but let's talk about those dark things, right? So we as authors put our characters through hell. They go through, emotional torture, physical torture, loss of loved ones, life-changing events that are forever going to define them. How do you guys deal with giving space to react to those things? Do you jump over that space between books? Do you dedicate a large portion of your stories to dealing with trauma? How do you take care of it?
I think it's going to depend largely on the theme and tone of the book to a certain extent, because there's no one answer to that question. The supervillainy saga, which starts with the rules of supervillainy, has some dark content to begin with, but it's still a humorous series there. So you have to deal with the consequences of what happens there in a way that the audience is able to bounce with, but can still reflect the actual feelings involved there. I make fun of some cliches on that men too there, because at the start of book 3, Gary is just sitting in his chair with the 5-day growth beard, staring blankly forward, everyone trying to cheer him up, but otherwise reacting just kind of like the traumatic victim of circumstance that he is. And, that's funny to the reader, but it certainly is not to Gary. And it lends an authenticity to the story that continues from there. And, sometimes I do actually have time skips of either months or years or so on, and leave the consequences having been dealt with, but still always permanently scarring the character's life. Mm-hmm. G is a guy who... Sorry, go.
Oh, no. You were still finishing. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Well, my character G in Agent G, shocking name there, is a guy who gradually manages to carve himself some humanity and regain his sense of self there, but it involves dealing with personal betrayals, the fact he's never quite able to trust the same people that he used to, and also discovering, the happily ever after he envisioned with at least one love interest. Turns out, oh, wow, I was just being used the entire time. And that's going to reflect all future relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Because, cyborg spy, you're going to expect some cyborg betrayal.
Yes, I would expect it.
In fact, actually, I will also go and say that the ending that comes from a place of, bittersweetness is often much more authentic to the characters. I don't know why I said authentic instead of authentic. That's where your mind occasionally gets ahead of your...
We're writers. We can make up words.
Yeah.
Portmanteaus all over the place.
Authentic is a word I made up for the future. Yes, I'm entirely...
We're going to stick to that. You have witnesses. You made this up.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. It was intentional.
I was going to talk about the ending of Neuromancer. Without spoilers, the characters go through absolute hell for what would normally be a lighthearted heist movie if it had a different tone. But at the end of things, they've managed to achieve their goal, but the relationships are permanently severed because everyone had to try and go for what they really wanted, and that meant burning their fellows. The last ending, I'm not saying who ends up where or with what, but the heartbreak is why the story's ending is remembered. Yes.
And Chris, I know that you're writing the sequel to Divinity's Twilight, Rebirth. I know that your characters go through one hell of a lot. How has it been for you, writing your first sequel, dealing with the events and the fallout of a whole book?
Oh, well, I'd say that it went along the whole way. And this is talking more to my writing process than anyone else, because before I even released Divinity's Twilight Rebirth, I essentially had all of book 2 finished and then book 3 outlined. So I knew where the fallout was going to be. And it's sort of a steady progress, I'd say, that people bear their scars as they go along. For example, Valen, the main character, that he comes into it with a very tragic backstory that he's buried, and he buries it in a very playboy mentality, that he is going to live life to the fullest, that he is going to essentially use magic to force himself to fall asleep, that he is not going to have these nightmares that have plagued him about his past. And eventually, after enough of this dissipation, that he does forget about it. And he's going to a military academy. He's not studying like he should. He's not training. And he eventually gets his butt handed to him, actually by the heroine, the other girl on the cover, Celeste. And so that's an interesting period of time. And so she comes in with her own baggage from a very different history. And the clashing of these two personalities and these two backstories forms a lot of the narrative push, a lot of the tension for the group dynamics going forward, because there's another 6 people that go on this journey with them. And I won't go getting into all of them. But so we go through, we hit our darkest night, no spoilers, anything like that. Valen is not completely broken at that point. And so there's 2 ways you can go about this. You can do it incrementally, which is what I could do, or you can do it all at once. And the question is, how much navel gazing do you want to do as an author? And we use navel gazing as the term of that the character is literally looking down and talking to themselves in their mind, or you're having another person be a foil for them and telling them why what they think is wrong. Why what they think is wrong. Yes, I said that correctly. And so Valen gets a little bit of this from different people that are more experienced, people that have gone through it, the same things that he has. And because of the personality I've set up for him, well, he has to reject that. He has to be broken down further. That we have to peel away the hard shell in order to get at the mushy center underneath and stir that up and actually make something good of it in the oven after we finish baking. You can take a lot of baking analogies and apply them to writing. And every single character has a recipe like that. Every single character has something that makes them tick. And that's why we're saying when you head into that character's darkest night, regardless of what book it's in or what point it is in their arc, the outcome is going to be different. The way they respond to it's going to be different. And then you get to use all your other tools, your side characters, your environment, your world, everything that you've created to provide solutions for them to choose from.
And I haven't written any book twos yet. I have plots for both of them, though. I actually mostly wrote a book two for my first book that I ever wrote and published, which is called Depths. And that book I am currently actually rewriting because now that I'm stronger as a writer, I want to go back and give it more life. And it starts out with death, but then adds in the prologue, but then later on, halfway through the first part, you figure out the actual true situation, what actually happened at the death. And it's the moment where the main character is ripped a little bit the most because it's her brother. And I wrote it not too long after my own brother passed. And so it has a lot of extra grit in it to me, but it's meant to be that way, but it's also meant to be bittersweet in some parts. And it kind of helped build the climax because that was the ultimate spot where the character is starting to realize what's going on, that something else is happening, and she has to figure out a way to go through that. And since I'm rewriting it, I don't want to say too much, but it does involve cults and sci-fi and alien planets and everything, and it's fun. I just have to rewrite it.
So I have a couple questions about genre. In your opinion, does the purpose of pushing a character to their breaking point, is it a universal thing, or does the purpose of it in a narrative change depending on genre? Because sometimes we see The Darkest Night as a vehicle to make the characters rise all the brighter. And sometimes you see Darkest Nights as a way for the character to reach catharsis, but it might be, very emotionally loaded. And sometimes you leave it at The Darkest Night. There are some just emotionally scarring stories that the point is to make you feel these deep emotions and leave you hanging. So what's your experience with different genres? I know we have a comedy writer, a horror writer, a fantasy writer. We have a lot of different people here.
It can depend on the genre. I think it's very important all the way around, but the extent to we use it is different, because I know as a reader, I can tell that fantasy does a lot more of the building up and then taking them down and building them up again. Because usually it starts out with the person, usually, not always, because there's some that are, some main characters that are really high up and they fall and then go back up, or they'll start out really low, like peasant level or lower, and then they'll be built up, and then that's where their climax is way up here. It's not where they're down low. So it's very interesting that way. But horror on the other hand, that one can, mine, there is no happy ending. So it stays at The Darkest Night, and you'll never leave The Darkest Night. But I know some that do a little bit more than that. Mine are short stories, so they tend to be a little faster than normal novels. But even most horror novels, even if there is a little building of a character, they're still constantly at dark night. Take Ash of the Evil Dead, for instance. It's not a good happy ending. It's just he lives with, his arm chopped off and has a chainsaw or something on it. I can't quite remember, but it's not constant. Evil Dead, yeah.
So very small hot take. Allegra answered her own question.
Yes,
So
she did.
with that hot take out of the way, I'd say it's more about the trappings of the genre that changes how you handle The Darkest Night. For example, so Divinity's Twilight, using my own work as an example, that the main crucible is a war between three of the major countries, that it's been going on for 700 years. Countless people have died, and there's hatred and enmity swirling around that just keep perpetuating this conflict, even though it's destroying regions, it's hurting economies, it's tearing apart people within this species, within the different races. And the main characters are thrown into this. They're a young people, but they're initially part of a neutral nation. They don't think that they're going to get swept along with this, so they're very surprised when they get drawn into the larger conflict. But before that, you have the small character conflicts. You have things going on with Celeste and her backstory. You have things going on with Valen, and he was raised as an orphan thief. I butchered those words. Orphan thief on the streets of Sewer Town, which is essentially where all the dirty water, all the cesspit of humanity and everything comes together beneath one of these major cities, and everyone on the surface just ignores what's going on down here. And it was a horrible childhood. And then somehow he gets out of this, and now he's beholden to his adoptive father, who's a politician in this kingdom. So how does he handle that relationship dynamic? All the people that look down on him, they remember his birth. So you have class dynamics, and that puts tension on the character. And those are, again, just the two main leads there. And I try not to spoil things about Celeste because she has a lot going on. But Valen, you could just pick apart that all day. And those are very much epic fantasy trappings, that you are exploring a lot of socioeconomic principles through the pressures that you put on your character. And so it affects them, it affects the way that they view the world and their morality and how they're going to come out on the other side. But they also have a push and pull aspect on their society, because the point of fantasy, or at least epic fantasy, that has dark elements but maybe more of a positive outlook, is that characters can change their surroundings for better or worse, that they are going to have an impact on them. That's what Jessica was saying, that you have people that start at lofty stations and come down low, or you have a coming of age story where someone rises from the ashes of their childhood, like Valen, and starts to work their way up. And then I beat him up repeatedly, and we break him down and go from there.
Fascinating stuff there. I think there's a very interesting flow here where there are always expectations of a genre, and sometimes the reader gets caught in the idea that this is a promise rather than a tendency. For instance, Game of Thrones is famous because it inverts so many classical fantasy beats while making use of other ones there. I mean, no one would remember it the way it did if Game of Thrones didn't end the way it did.
That's season one. Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. I should be saying A Song of Ice and Fire, but we all know what I'm talking about here. And in the case of other genres, we have a higher expectation that things will go catastrophically wrong. For instance, cyberpunk is often described as a neo-noir, or at least a combination of science fiction and the classic dark detective fiction where victories of the protagonist are never complete. They are often just, maybe the bad guys get punished, but you don't save anyone, or maybe you save someone and the bad guys get off scot-free, or the victory is incomplete at very best. Maybe you just walk away alive at most. And that's something that influences both of my works there. The supervillainy saga takes the premise of the protagonist being a quote-unquote supervillain, at least in his mind, and he's in a setting where there are these paragons and great superheroes that are the living embodiments of good, but, well, that ironically enough just makes things so much worse for him because they are very confident in their righteousness while he just doesn't exist out of their ways. And going against them also makes him question, am I doing the right thing? Right up until they stomp all over anything that he likes. And he's like, yeah, you got to go.
It reminds me of The Boys, a very grim, dark take on what is normally a noble, bright genre.
Oh, yes. It's interesting enough also that I introduced the concept of in-universe anti-heroes who are like the Punisher and Wolverine and so on, who are just thinking like, let's just kill all these supervillains and their henchmen, and well, the public will love us for it. And obviously that gets Gary thinking, yeah, I need to kill these guys. And there's also anti-villains like himself and a handful of others that are just people who are driven to their particular acts by being against society. In this universe, the X-Men would be considered anti-villains because, well, they're rebels against the man. They're breaking the law, criminals, all terrible,
Absolutely.
and we all know Magneto is right.
True that.
Yes, and finally going on with Agent G, I set up in the foreword, I actually just flat out address the readers when I say the start of the book here. This is going to start in a world that's about 20 minutes in the future from us there. Technology is a little bit better. Obviously, there are cybernetics there, but they're restricted to the military and very much secret. And AI and all these things that are not affecting society more. But at some point, this is all going to get released onto the market there. And the greed, corruption, and general nastiness of humanity is going to result in the entire world suffering for it until it becomes a cyberpunk dystopia. And we're going to follow the fact that the protagonist can't do a damn thing about this. He just has to roll with it. And I think that's by itself interesting because it's the darkest night of the world. And we're just following the hero as he deals with it and his own issues.
That actually brings a really good point that we are all told early in our writing career, conflict is, man against man or man against nature or man against himself. Do darkest nights and can there be a darkest night outside of your viewpoint characters, like to the setting or darkest nights for the plot, but not necessarily for the characters? And how do you integrate those into a story that almost naturally, most stories have a protagonist and have some kind of audience insert?
I think that's a very interesting point there. And what I like to call that is there's something to be said for fantasy and science fiction and other genres dealing with controlled helplessness, which is the idea that the protagonist is usually able to move mountains and affect the entire face of the setting. But there's also books that have done really well with the idea that there are just forces bigger than everyone, and maybe you can save yourself, but you can't save the world. The Witcher series by Sapkowski and now adapted to the Netflix series is primarily like Game of Thrones and the works of Joe Abercrombie, and the fact the protagonist is a good guy. He's pretty capable. He's capable of doing a lot of things like, killing whoever is coming to kill him and maybe saving a few people here and there. But society is systemically bad because they don't shy away that the medieval period is just crappy if you're not an actual king or queen. And even then. And just like surviving from book to book and trying to keep your loved ones from being trampled by the nastiness of war, famine, poverty, and so on is by itself a impressive story. And, there's a good argument that you could do a story like The Lord of the Rings and you're not Frodo. You're just like watching the hordes of Mordor pour over you and trying to deal with that is now your fate.
That is something that I think about so often, about the little everyday stories and little everyday heroes that are existing around the stories that most authors want to tell. Like, I want the book about Farmer Maggot dealing with things in the Shire while Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin are off adventuring. That is desperately the book I actually want to read.
With the original plot line where the armies of Isengard go to the Shire.
Of course.
That would be an interesting book.
I wanted that part of the book in a movie.
It was always my favorite part. The Scouring of the Shire and that whole sequence is, to me, the heart of the entire trilogy, and it deserves its own saga about normal people who aren't going to change the world but might just save their hometown.
I mean, that's just by itself the Tolkien version of the Nazi occupation. It's like, oh yeah, we have the Hobbit resistance punishments. They're the checkpoints, orcs in positions of power, and Now someone has to write that book. There, work on it, Russell. I'll draft you an outline.
That'll eventually happen in Divinity's Twilight at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But so speaking about what Allegra was saying, the way that you do that is you don't necessarily change your point of views. You can write that story. You can pick 4 or so very ordinary people and go and tell a war story. You can go and tell about refugee crisis or immigration or a disease or any of these different topics. But the way that you do with your main characters is you put them in situations that they're uncomfortable with. I have an audience insert on the villain side that solely exists to point out the flaws in what the antagonists are doing, that he walks through their capital city, and where there was once grandeur, there's now squalor. There's a former soldier just sitting on a corner begging with his mangy not grangy, it's gangly, mangy, there we go. Mangy mutt next to him, a cane, and a soiled tricorn hat that was 2 generations back in their army, just to show how long they've been fighting this war and how it's affected people. And he's currently in the army. He has to rush past this. He's too busy to pay any attention to this because the war is still on. He still has something to accomplish. And he just has this image in the back of his mind for the rest of the day that he can't get it out, even as he goes about the rest of his tasks. Yeah. And so there are these little moments that you get to have, that you get to peer into the soul of your work, or you get to peer into the soul of fantasy in general and tackle these greater socioeconomic problems. And the story of that man sitting on the corner probably wouldn't be exciting. A lot of people probably wouldn't want to read it, but it's still an important story to tell. And so you use different lenses. It's like turning a square of glass, and it reflects in different ways. And that's how you use your POVs.
Sci-fi is very good at it because you'll have times where they'll get the news that, something has happened to this other planet, but they can't get there in time. Or you'll have them coming across a derelict ship, and they know what happened to the ship, and all the character can think about is how that person must have felt at that time, or just simple things like that just make it so much more piercing. Because I don't remember who said it, but he talked about kind of like the show versus tell thing, where he was talking about, don't tell that the war is going on, show it in like the child's little shoe with blood on it next to the road, or things like that. And it makes it so much more when it isn't even the character themselves experiencing the action.
There is something really poignant to me in writing the darkest nights of very minor characters. There is an example is that in Where Shadows Lie, there's a guard. And for most of the book, you don't get her name. She's just this redheaded guard at the prison that occasionally has to go run to get keys, or is scolded out of the room, or is given assignments. And at the very end, she becomes a character. She becomes kind of instrumental to the finale. And as I'm writing the sequel, the main character comes to this guard and says, "Why did you do what you did? I didn't know you. I didn't even know your name. It distinctly changed my life." And she tells a story about how this other completely tiny little minor character baked the best pies in the city, and that she went to her every day for a pie. And then one day, this baker was in one of her cells. And then they cut off her hands, and she would never be able to bake a pie again. And then now this character will just lost faith completely in the institution that she worked for, not because they were had some giant war, not because they were doing horrible things that she didn't want to be accomplished, but because of this little personal moment that to her was this crisis of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And it all happened off screen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about my Agent G series is, I said it's a progression from slightly into the future to a full-on cyberpunk dystopia with all the acid rain and neon of Blade Runner. But the funny thing is, the third book, where it finally reaches that moment, is actually an award-winning one. There, it won the 2021 Best Science Fiction Audiobook for the Indie Audiobook Awards, and part of that was because it really did fully bring the theme home. There, with the main character G has been able to survive and sometimes thrive in very harsh circumstances because he's a very flexible liar, manipulator, and killer. His ruthlessness allows him to get away with murder, is quite literally true there. But it doesn't necessarily mean that he's able to affect things, even when he's trying to do the right thing, because he's unable to stop the collapse of the old society and the rise of the corporate-run dictatorships that happen when the worst people in society are able to control the masses with technology well beyond what we have now there. You think Twitter and Facebook have caused things to be bad now there? Well, you will find everyone getting their news from the wrong people in the future there. By Karma Corp. And here's the thing: G is able to actually navigate, at least at the start of the book, has managed to navigate himself still to being rich and reasonably powerful, and carve a little niche for himself. But that doesn't bring him any happiness there, because he's able to save himself, but the rest of the world has gone to crap and is going to keep doing that. And that's an interesting place to start, because sometimes you just can't make things work out right. That's the reason Chinatown was so beloved there, because, man, it ends in the absolute worst possible way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a stronger story for that. And other stories sometimes benefit from just going full-on tragic. And
it's great that you start with a character that has something to lose, because the current system has benefited them. And that he still chooses to howl in the face of the wind anyway. That's a really great starting point.
It really is.
I mean, there's a general point there. A lot of characters also benefit from something that I recommend for definitely authors. It's good, even if you want your character to be likable, especially if you want them to be likable, for sometimes to have them make not just the objectively wrong decision for doing the right thing, but not to do the right thing at all there. The Aragorn is a great moral paragon and so on, but maybe a story would benefit if one of them does decide, oh hey, let's use the ring like Boromir, because that's a temptation that we would succumb to, at least some of us. Not because it's mind controlling us, but I mean, like maybe have them take the bribe sometime, or just abandon. One of my other book series, Lucifer's Star, is something that I won't spoil the ending for, but 2/3 through it, I had set them up for trying to stop a war and being heroic and doing the whole Star Wars thing before. The characters surprised me by saying, like, yeah, let's just get the hell out of here. This is none of our affair, and I don't want to give a crap who wins. So literally the rest of the book became, and I just went with it because it was such an idea, them trying to get the hell out of there and letting everyone shoot each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what everyone who has actually enjoyed that book has said is the best twist of that there. Just, both sides are bastards. I don't care who wins.
That's actually quite original in science fiction and fantasy. Usually people care quite deeply one way or the other. So we are approaching the 50-minute mark, and I want to kind of turn it over to a couple last questions. And the first is, we want our Darkest Nights to feel visceral. We want people to feel when they read them. What's your, one top piece of writing advice for writers to getting your characters to that point and getting the readers to feel along with your characters?
As a pantser, it's actually a little easier, I feel, because I'm pulling a lot of times. I'm pulling my own trauma or my own feelings into it more sometimes, and I can pull that deeper into what I'm doing on the page, and I can make it feel more real, at least to me, and hopefully to other writers. or to other readers too. Um, and I don't plan them out. I let the characters lead me. I do a bit of discovery writing here and there. I plot it after I've already written draft one. And so most of it's going by the seat of my pants, just letting it go. And if uh, basically pulling deep from my own depression or own trauma or something. And you can really get deep into that and make it more poignant when you have your own trauma to pull from. Now, if you don't, which hopefully a lot of people don't, that would be preferred. Um, I would choose something really terrible, find some show or something that you know can make you cry a drop of a hat, and just get some see what people actually feel in those moments, and you can kind of write that into your story a little bit. Mostly just do research if you've never had that feeling yourself.
I take the idea. Oh, go ahead.
Nope, you're fine. Go for it.
Oh, well, I was going to say that part of the reason we do give characters Dark Nights of the Soul is that it's much easier to sympathize with a person getting kicked in the chest than it is someone getting showered with gold. Inevitably, we tend to root for the underdog or the people that have been kicked around by life, because most of us at least have some story where it's happened to us. And that is the basis of sympathy there. It's also a good thing to note that if the character is reasonably flawed and not a paragon, I think we're more inclined to like them as well. And I believe, in fact, if a Dark Night of the Soul involves someone wrestling with temptations and flaws that they succumb to, that will even increase the sympathy that they have even more. One of the things I've noticed with A Song of Ice and Fire is Cersei has a lot more fans than I think George R. R. Martin ever intended, because so many fans, including especially women, but also men, is her life sucks. No matter how bad a person she is, and it's not just because she has had these bad things that happened to her that she became a bad person. No, she's just rotten from childhood on. It's still, you still want to sympathize with the very believable and realistic position of, I was born, I was put in a marriage to someone I hate, I'm trapped there, I will never get particularly better, and the only people I care about are people I'm forbidden with being with. And that is something that automatically will engage the reader's sympathy. And no matter how bad she gets, a lot of us are saying, like, go for it.
Yeah.
And that's also why people love Daenerys, with slightly more justification.
Yeah. Well, villains. Sorry, Chris. 1 second.
No, you're fine.
Villains usually. I actually tend, depending on how well the main character is written, I will actually vote for the villain to actually win by the end. If the main character is too overpowered or too non-human, like, obviously it's like no normal person is going to, not even normal, just any person is not going to act like that in that situation, then I'm going to start rooting for the villain, and usually by the end I'm like, please win. Just like take them down a peg or two. And that's usually why I love villain stories, is because it's that type of thing, and I love those. So I will be reading your stuff.
I'm going to embrace this tangent. So embrace the villainous tangent. So I think the reason that we emphasize so much with villains, especially ones with some sort of logical or rationale behind their actions, is that we want to be able to do that. We want to be able to abandon our strict set of morals or the code that society has forced on us, and take whatever action that we need to accomplish our aims, to bring about the glorious future that we see, the peace in our time, an end to disease, no more torture, no more racism, all these different topics that are tackled by fantasy or sci-fi villains, that they let loose, they go after it. And we want to be that person. We want to reach for those stars. And the heroes, they're often trapped within their morality. They are who we should aspire to be, but they're not accomplishing things as quickly or as efficiently as we desire. And I think that's part of what causes us to latch on to these really great villains in the genre, that we either think that they're doing the right thing, or we feel bad for them when they fail.
That's
Anyway,
why
back.
Deadpool's so awesome.
Yes, because he straddles the line. He's an anti-hero. We love anti-heroes.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
But back to the question about The Darkest Night, I think that you as an author have two questions, and the reader's going to be asking the same two questions on the other side. Why did my character get here? So all the actions that they took, the mistakes that they made, the flaws or limitations that they started with, and that's a whole nother topic that we can get into, the difference between a flaw and a limitation. And then once they've gotten to this point and you've summed up everything that led them here, what do I expect them to learn? How do I expect them to come out of this? What is the lesson? And if you are able to satisfactorily summarize both of those to come up with a rationale in and out, you're going to have a great Darkest Night, because your character is going to be set on a new trajectory and they're going to have an effect on the rest of your story. They have the push to keep going towards the end, toward your climax.
Yeah. My piece of advice is that The Darkest Night should have something of a no-win scenario to it. It should involve an ethical dilemma where there is no clean solution. It should involve a sacrifice that you need to make to move forward, or something that needs to be ripped away to expose whatever path there is out of it. That's how you make it visceral, at least when I'm writing, is by making the reader unable to see a path forward that doesn't include the pain of getting there.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I'm going to ask one last question, and feel free to answer it and then tell our viewers how to find your books and you. And the question, and we're just going to go in the opposite order we introduced ourselves. So C.T. Phipps, Chris, then Jessica. The question is there such a thing as too much suffering for a character?
I think that every reader has a certain level of tolerance for the level of suffering that you put your protagonist through there, because while you can definitely get all manner of enjoyment from seeing a protagonist suffer and even die, there's also plenty of books where I see on Reddit or other forums where people have stopped in mid-book, is like going like, I'm not going to go read any further of this. I don't like the grimdark, which gets thrown around a lot there. Funnily, I write for a magazine called Grimdark Magazine, because there are other people who are like, this is what I'm looking for in my fantasy. I want to see it get worse before it gets worser.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You had us in the first half, not going to lie.
Oh, yeah. And that's a thing that, you're not going to please everyone. And if there is some stories that I think try a little too hard to be edgy, I don't think there's actually a limit to how much suffering you can put someone through, because if the story demands it, and that goes for it. And, sometimes you can just have the devil poke his finger in and just pull the rug out of from someone, and maybe that'll feel like cheating. But generally, it's only when you feel like you're trying to be mature and dark and throwing in randomly because you don't trust your story to carry you to the level you need to go to, that it becomes obvious that you're being a poser. And that's a very different complaint than just too much. But I've seen it.
Right, where can we find you?
Shadow, and his family was killed, and then his second family. And now he's after revenge on the man that he got revenge on. Son. Who killed a second family.
It can go on and on.
Where's the roommate's cousin in all this?
I mean, I've seen stories where they definitely go to comic lengths of tragic backstory there, especially when it involves them losing everything just so they can be like the guy who has nothing to lose but apparently just really, really enjoys killing people. I'm not saying which characters they are, but we all know them.
Yes, we do. All right, CT, where can people find you? How can they purchase your books?
Yes, I am available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Smashwords, all the places. Just look up CT Phipps. I especially recommend getting the audiobook versions of my books because I have one for every one of them, and especially for Agent G and the Supervillainy Saga, which is done by Jeffrey Kafer. Great guy.
Fantastic. And you also review a few sites, right?
Yes, I am a reviewer at booknest.eu, where I have over 100 reviews of fantasy novels, both indie and traditional. And I also do reviews for Grimdark Magazine, which is an e-zine that deals with dark fantasy, horror, and cyberpunk.
Fantastic. They're both amazing.
CT's very busy.
Definitely check those out. I read a lot of his reviews, and they're all just on point. Chris?
So I'm going to second everything CT said about there being a narrative limit to how much suffering that you can put somebody through, that's more about making it market palatable. As a tongue-in-cheek author, I'm going to say no, that I invented these characters for the express purpose of torturing them and making them suffer and sending them to hell and back. So as an author, no. And the places you can find me, you can find Divinity's Twilight, Rebirth, and all my other products on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. The ebook is wide, print is wide. You'll be able to find it in any place you can imagine. You can go to my website right now. I'm running specials, $4.95 signed copies. You'll be able, that's my name here. Other way. There we are. ChristopherRussellAuthor.com. So that exact spelling, add an author, added.com. You can find me at Christopher_Russell_author on Instagram and Chris_DT_author on Twitter. And those are your best places to go for news and information about the series, upcoming short story releases, and all the information as I struggle through the 400K word monstrosity that is book 2.
All right. I am going to go with both of them because no, there's not too much suffering because I am also a horror author. So no, there's not too much suffering. But as a reader, it's up to the reader if their level of too much suffering is a different story. You can reach me. My name is, this is my pen name. If you take out the dot and just jdorden.com, or move the dot rather, you can keep up with all of my books, and I'm supposed to have a blog on there. It exists. I need to work on it a bit more, but I keep updated on all the books I'm working on, the side projects. I even have little bars saying I'm doing the revisions and stuff, and I am available on Amazon. I will be eventually getting on Audible, but that's going to take some time. And I am Jessica Dorden, or Dorden Jessica on Twitter. This name again on Insta. And if you're on my website, it'll link you to my Facebook group.
Fantastic. Thank you all for being here. As always, I'm Allegra Piscatori. My books are available ebooks on Amazon, Where Shadows Lie is now on Audible, narrated by the amazing Miriam Hussey. Really a fantastic narration. Wonderful to work with her. Beautiful. And most of all, you can find me on Discord. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and all the other places, but I run the Plot Mom Discord. It's a happening place. I will be linking it down below, and you can find it pretty much everywhere I am. Jay Dorden and Chris are there all the time, and we'd love to have you. We do writing sprints and read each other's work and cheer each other on. And you'll be seeing me here every Tuesday and Friday. Until the end of August, I have them all booked up. Tuesdays, we're going to be doing half-hour author interviews on exciting subjects with one-on-one amazing indie authors. And then every Friday, we're going to be doing one of these roundtables on fun and wacky subjects that we can go way in depth with and go off on tangents like tonight. So thank you 3 for being my guinea pigs and being the first ones on. It was an absolute pleasure to have you. And with that, I wave you all good night.
Good night.
Good night.